6:39, you're watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Anne. Morning to you.
Should we take a look at today's front pages? There's going to be COVID-style tax breaks for firms facing ruin, according to the Times. The government is planning to... making plans to see VAT and business rates slashed to help companies stay afloat.
Most GPs saw their earnings rise to an eye-watering average of £142,000 during the pandemic as GPs participated in the vaccine rollout, but many patients were unable to get a face-to-face appointment. That's in the Telegraph.
The Daily Star calls Boris a pot kettle prat as he came out of hibernation to offer us some energy advice, which was that we could all save £10 a year by buying a new, more efficient kettle. Wonder where he got that one from.
What?
I mean, what made him think of that?
Oh, don't know.
Odd.
Don't know. It is a bit, to be fair, it is a bit odd. £10 a year, I think, is not what most people... What's that work out at?
Not a lot.
A day, no, more than that, but still, not a lot. Let's talk to author and broadcaster Nikki Hodgson and editor of Spiked, Tom Slater. Morning,
Morning.
Of course, kick off with the energy crisis. Tom, what are these COVID-style tax breaks the Times is talking about?
So these are some kind of, it seems, bare bones plans that Nadhim Zahawi's been drawing up so that whoever comes in as the next Prime Minister, I think we all guess who that might be at this point looking at the polls, has something to go on. So taking the lead from some of the COVID relief, this would be targeted reductions in VAT and business rates to help retail and hospitality. But as with so many of these suggestions at the moment, you do wonder if even that's going to be enough. I mean, given the fact that hospitality venues, pubs, cafes, you name it, they're not even protected by the energy price cap now. So many of them are already saying that they've had to close, and this is before the worst of it. So we all know that going into next year, these energy costs are going to get even higher. So a kind of laying out of some relief for businesses, which hasn't been forthcoming so far, and has probably led a lot of places to almost shut down quite preemptively. But at the same time, is it going to be enough, and are we going to see the...
And who is actually putting this forward?
This is Nadhim Zahawi himself.
So, I mean, he might not be Chancellor in a few days' time anyway.
Exactly.
He probably won't be.
Exactly. No. They're very unlikely. It seems that what has been sort of going on in terms of the few things that have been put out there recently is at least something to go on, something that would, as I say, be a kind of bare bones, something that you can imagine being relatively uncontroversial regardless of who comes in. But as you say, it could easily just be thrown up into the air depending on who comes in and what plans they want to do.
It's going to be Kwasi, isn't it? Kwasi Kwarteng.
That seems like who the smart money is on. He's very close to Liz Truss, very similar thinking in terms of economics and politics, and also just quite close personal friends, so it seems very likely.
But you wonder then, what's the point of an announcement like this? If in 3 or 4 days' time, Kwasi Kwarteng could walk in and just say, don't like the idea of that, we'll do something.
Yeah. It does seem like they're kind of stuck in a difficult position where there's so little being talked about, so little being said. I mean, you can only hope that these are the sorts of things which is, whether it's with a proper agreement or just a kind of nod and a wink behind closed doors, that these are things that both candidates would roughly be in favour of, because not only just households but also businesses are waiting to hear something, and all they're getting so far from the candidates is more is on the way, which obviously is useless.
Well, Nikki, in the Star, we are of course getting the buy yourself a new kettle and save £10 a year from the Prime Minister. I've got to say, I've never seen an electric kettle that costs £10 or less.
Well, I don't know what he's thinking. I just don't know what he was thinking in saying this. It's the usual thing. He probably wasn't thinking. But this is, I mean, when people say, oh, you know, Boris gets things wrong, he's a bit of a fool, but we enjoy it. How can you enjoy these kinds of remarks when people are so desperately worried about how they're going to survive the winter? You know, and it's like, has he been reading any newspapers? Has he talked to any of his ministers? Everybody is so worried about this. You're covering it on GBNEWS every day. You know, there's a very real threat to life, and yet he's going on about a £10 kettle. It doesn't make any sense. And for anybody who's thinking, oh, you know, well, it doesn't matter, he's out in a few weeks or whatever, and then, you know, we're not going to see him again. There is a lot of talk about this man making a resurgence at some point. So, you know, just please don't vote for him anymore. That's me saying that, obviously. But, you know, why are you listening to somebody who's giving you this terrible...
On the other hand, I watched a bit of the quote where he said it, and it was, I think it was intended to be a throwaway remark, wasn't it?
I think it was...
A little funny.
But again, it's just not funny, is it, at this point, when there's so much at stake, and people are so worried and so desperate.
It doesn't make a lot of sense, I'll give it that. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, it doesn't make economic sense, does it? How many years does it take for the kettle to pay for itself?
I don't think it was intended as practical advice, though. I think it was part of this kind of thing about how, you know, a lot of politicians have been so short-sighted and nuclear, and this was supposed to be a kind of like small example of it, but obviously he knows how this is going to get packaged, and it looks like him giving advice during the cost of living crisis to buy a different
He misjudged this one.
Yes,
He really did.
definitely misjudged.
Meanwhile, our GPs should be able to afford to get through this crisis.
They can get as many kettles as they want. This is the story in the Telegraph about GPs achieving record pay during the pandemic. So their average earnings reaching 142,000. A lot of this rise seems to be a combination of factors, one of which is that during the pandemic, and particularly during the latter half of it, they were paid around £13 to £15 a jab as part of the big mass vaccination rollout. Many people remember their kind of local GP surgeries becoming a kind of main hub for people to get vaccinated, as well as the fact that they were continuing to be paid, it seems, for a lot of the previous kind of routine things that they would do, whether it was working with the elderly or checking up on certain types of patients, which they didn't then have to do. And as a consequence of this, they've seen their wages rise. And obviously it's just something which no one doubts that GPs are very again, qualified people, and I'm sure they work very hard. Even
they do work. You've got to say, I know we might not be getting what we want out of GPs and getting the face-to-face appointments, and it is difficult and all the rest of it, and I know that as well as anybody else. However, they are hard-working people. We have a lot coming in on the show. They're good, very clever, hard-working people that we rely on.
I think that's an important point. I think the issue is that the way the system's set up at the moment, kind of post-COVID, is what has done it for them. You know, the way in which obviously they were kind of decommissioned in a way in terms of their face-to-face care, and then ever since then this huge backlog has built up. So, and also then there was the vaccination program, again entirely necessary, but it effectively took them out of the equation for so long. So there's a kind of systemic problem with a lot of this, and I agree you can't just go and call GPs work shy or something like that. It's ridiculous. But this is a problem.
Why would they have been paid £13 a jab when that was their job?
Well, this is a good question. I suppose it has something to do with the fact that GPs do have this strange kind of status, as we kind of think of them as part of our broader health service, but they are self-employed. The nature of GP practices is a kind of separate entity. But it did seem like this was, I guess, part of the kind of sweetening of the deal, because you remember at the beginning of the vaccine rollout, there was a bit of resistance of how are we going to be able to maintain care. So obviously these incentives around paying.
They weren't doing their surgeries, were they? That's the whole point. They weren't doing face-to-face appointments, which was their job. They were being asked to do jabs. I don't quite understand why they get paid per jab when administering care and medicine is their job.
It does make a lot of sense. I suppose maybe it's got something to do with trying to incentivise all of those surgeries to get involved in the vaccine rollout. I'm not 100% sure, but still.
Need to. It was the national
I got jabbed by an army medic last time round because he drafted a lot of army medics in where I live anyway. I bet he didn't get 13 quid.
No, I got jabbed twice by volunteers who weren't being paid.
Interesting, isn't it? Like, can we talk about, because actually this is important moving forward. It's in The Guardian, Nikki. Crab shells.
Yeah, we can talk about crab shells. Crab shells are going to save the planet, apparently, because they can make us more sustainable electric car batteries. So, bear with me, because I'm not a scientist. It's a little bit complicated. But basically, crabs, shrimps and lobsters, they've got exoskeletons, and that contains something called chitin. And chitin is the substance that makes them really hard, the shells.
Yeah.
And so that, through chemical processing, can be synthesised to form a firm gel membrane, and then that's used as an electrolyte for a battery.
Right.
So that's the explanation of how it works. And obviously, it's kind of like it's renewable, and it's a product that lots of restaurants just get rid of, obviously because they just discard the shells. So, you know, the solution to that problem is before us, basically.
There you go. It's amazing what nature provides, isn't it?
It is amazing what nature's got up its pocket, isn't it? Absolutely amazing.
Nikki, mushy peas, yes or no?
Oh, yes. I'm northern as well, so come on.
Yeah.
But only with fish and chips, not with Sunday dinner.
Really?
No.
Oh, Tom?
Yes, with fish and chips, no with Sunday dinner. I'd never heard that before.
I've never heard it.
Oh,
See what prejudices come out the minute you mention the word mushy peas.
yes. Where's my? I had one about Sunday dinner. Was it on my own Twitter feed? Here we go. Joy Boukstead, also known as Dear Old Mom. She's a northern lass. She says, my mum always served mushy peas on a roast dinner with gravy and greens on top. Quite right, Joy. That's the way to do it. Ian in Dorset says, down here in deepest, darkest Dorset, all the chippies sell pea fritters. I laugh every time I hear people asking for cotton chips with what they call something
Swan
else.
poo.
Swan poo.
Apparently they call it, pea fritters are called swan poo.
It's amazing with mint sauce.
Is that what they look like? Mint sauce, no, you
Outside.
see, the mint sauce is all right. He says, P.S. Wish everyone well with the weather today because it's day 2 of the Bournemouth Air Show.
Oh, that'll be nice.
Very good luck for
That'll
that.
be nice. Martin says mushy peas, 10 out of 10. Garden peas are disgusting. Oh, come on.
Hey, they're not.
Come on.
Paul in Wibsey says there are no fish and chips edible south of Sheffield.
Yeah, fair point. Chris in Oldham says mushy peas, have the peas wet with mint sauce. The best. There you go. My grandma and granddad used to run a chip shop.
Really?
Queen Street Chippy,
Oh,
Dalton in
lovely.
Furness. If you're old enough to remember, you'd have to be well in your sort of 80s and 90s to remember that now. It's a very, very, very long time ago. But yeah, Queen Street Chippy. If you're on Queen Street this morning in Dalton, this might be a bit of a lucky stab in the dark. There might be
Well,
someone on
you
Queen
never know.
Street
Might be
watching.
a-
It was right at the far end on the corner. There you go.
Listening on the app on their phone as they're out.
Yeah.
We've got a really famous fish and chippy in our village. People come from all around, miles and miles. It's really good.
Oh.
But don't you think? I mean, the fish and chips are very good. But don't you think that the chip meal is getting very expensive nowadays?
I haven't been to the Chippy in years.
I love fish and chips.
Years. That's only because I think about I'm thinking about the calories. I'm
I know, that's the
forever
trouble.
looking at
Yeah.
weight is a perennial issue for me. So I have to permanently trying to keep it down. But I'd love a bag of chips.
Just occasionally, very, very occasionally, make it a treat.
Should be a treat.